You're about to hear something you were never meant to know. Spring 1811, Richmond, Virginia. Workers demolishing an abandoned tobacco warehouse stumble upon 8 identical wooden boxes buried beneath rotting floorboards. Inside each box, a man's wedding ring engraved with different names, and a small glass vial filled with pale medicinal powder. These weren't random trinkets. They belonged to 8 dead husbands, 8 wealthy men, all married to the same woman. Her name, Ruth Holloway. History remembers her as a grieving widow, but the evidence they sealed that night suggests something else entirely. A woman who systematically dismantled Virginia's elite, one marriage at a time. Within hours, local magistrates sealed the discovery from public record. Officially, this incident never happened. Unofficially, whispers spread of an unholy conspiracy, one tied not just to murder, but to powerful families, hidden networks, and a knowledge of death that science still struggles to explain. If you think this is just another true crime story, you're wrong. Because the deeper you go, the more you realize. Ruth Holloway didn't just kill 8 men, she erased them. And someone, even now, wants you to stop listening. Autumn, 1782. Richmond was rebuilding from the ashes of revolution. White-columned mansions rose along the James River, funded by seized loyalist estates and secret British gold. Beneath the polished surface, betrayal thrived like rot beneath paint. And then she appeared. Ruth Holloway, 28 years old, striking, refined, draped in black widow's lace. She claimed her husband, a Continental Army captain, had died at Yorktown. That was the story Richmond's elites wanted to believe, but they didn't ask where she'd been before Virginia. They didn't ask about the month she vanished in Philadelphia, where she studied under a disgraced physician obsessed with creating painless, undetectable deaths. Ruth carried a leather-bound journal she called her family's remedies. Inside were no remedies. They were formulas, precise combinations of native alkaloids and herbs capable of mimicking common illnesses while leaving no trace in the body. The war had birthed new wealth and new enemies. Prominent men whispered secrets in drawing rooms, afraid their past treasons might resurface. But one by one, Ruth's future husbands came to her, believing they had chosen her. They hadn't. She chose them. And every man she chose shared one forbidden secret they could never confess. August 15th, 1783. A humid Virginia night, thick with cicadas. Inside his study, Colonel Edmund Fairfax, one of Richmond's wealthiest tobacco magnates, doubled over his desk, clutching his stomach in agony. Jupiter, a house servant, crept to the window and froze. Inside, he saw Ruth Holloway, calm as marble, preparing a steaming cup of medicinal tea. "Drink this, my dear Edmund," she whispered softly, her voice melodic but edged with something cold. "It will ease the pain." Fairfax obeyed. Within minutes, his body convulsed violently. Then, silence. Ruth didn't scream. Not yet. She stood there, watching him die, her face unreadable in the flickering candlelight. Only after carefully rinsing the cup and hiding the basin did she finally call for help, her wails piercing the night like a well-rehearsed performance. Dr. Harrison arrived at dawn, examined the body, and declared it acute gastric fever, a common Virginia ailment. No suspicion, no investigation. Fairfax's will left Ruth a small fortune. Richmond society praised her grace in tragedy. But what no one knew, not yet, was that Fairfax was the first name on a secret list Ruth had carried since Yorktown, and this was only the opening move. 3 months after Colonel Fairfax's funeral, Ruth Holloway was already being courted by another powerful man, Captain William Randolph, a shipping magnate who made his fortune supplying the Continental Army. To the public, it looked natural, a grieving widow seeking protection in a ruthless world. But Ruth wasn't looking for safety. She was hunting. Randolph, like Fairfax, belonged to an unspoken circle. a network of Virginia's most prominent men who had fed intelligence to the British during the war. While patriots bled at Yorktown, these men sold out their country for gold, land, and future political favor. They thought their betrayal was buried forever. They were wrong. Ruth had her husband's letters, proof of the network's existence, names, dates, payments, every secret they'd sworn to keep hidden. After his death at Yorktown, she swore she'd make every single one of them pay. Randolph never suspected. When his beloved wife prepared his nightly tonic, he drank deeply. Within days, his stomach burned as if set aflame. By the third night, he begged for a doctor. Ruth smiled softly. "Trust me, William. This will pass." It didn't. 2 names down. 6 to go. By now, whispers crawled like smoke through Richmond's slave quarters. Jupiter, sold to another household after Fairfax's death, met old Caesar, a servant in Captain Randolph's estate, at the market. Caesar's face was pale when he whispered what he'd found hidden behind a loose board in Randolph's study. A small glass vial filled with fine white powder, faintly smelling of bitter almonds. Jupiter's eyes widened. "Same thing I seen at Fairfax's house. Same smell. Same bottle." The enslaved whispered carefully in shadows, beyond the ears of white society. They began keeping their own records, small scraps of memory passed between kitchens, stables, and tobacco fields. They noted how Ruth always repaired her husband's medicines herself, how she walked alone into the forests, returning with baskets of herbs she guarded like treasure. They saw what Richmond's elite refused to see. But there was something else. Something stranger. Ruth wasn't killing at random. Every man she married had a secret. Every death silenced another member of a network no one dared name aloud. By the time Judge Thomas Henley courted her, the enslaved community knew the pattern too well. But they also sensed something darker than revenge, because some nights, when Ruth returned from the woods, they swore. Her eyes weren't the same. January 23, 1786. Judge Thomas Henley, prominent legislator, architect of Virginia's new legal system, and Ruth Holloway's third husband, collapsed mid-sentence during a grand dinner at their Clay Street mansion. 12 of Richmond's most powerful citizens watched as his face drained of color, his hands trembling violently. Ruth rushed to his side, holding a small silver cup. "Drink, my love. It will settle your stomach." Henley obeyed, and moments later, his body seized. He fell backward, smashing his wineglass against the polished mahogany floor. Gasps filled the candlelit room. Guests screamed for a doctor. Dr. Harrison, summoned for the third time, arrived swiftly. But again, he found nothing unusual. No wounds, no poison he could detect. Just another prominent man dead from what he diagnosed as acute gastric distress. In the days that followed, whispers grew. 3 husbands dead, all powerful, all wealthy, all connected. And yet, no one dared accuse Ruth. Why? Because Henley, like Fairfax and Randolph, belonged to a secret circle of men whose influence touched every courtroom, every estate, every plantation. To expose Ruth would expose them, and that's when Ruth realized something chilling. Their silence made her untouchable. By 1789, Ruth Holloway had buried 5 husbands, each death as quiet as a whisper, each fortune absorbed into her growing empire. And yet, her methods evolved. That year, an unfamiliar figure appeared on Richmond's outskirts. Dr. Marcus Wainwright, a disgraced Philadelphia physician once expelled for unethical experiments. Few knew the truth. Wainwright had been obsessed with perfecting undetectable poisons that mimicked natural diseases. Ruth knew him well. During her missing months in Philadelphia, she had studied under him, learned his formulas, memorized his combinations. But when Wainwright resurfaced in Virginia, he didn't come to teach. He came to collect. He knew what Ruth was doing, and why. He demanded a cut of every inheritance, supplying her with improved formulas in exchange. Together, they refined methods so precise, even modern forensics would struggle to trace them. But Wainwright made a fatal mistake. He thought Ruth was killing for wealth. He didn't understand. This wasn't greed. This was retribution. Every man on Ruth's list had betrayed her husband at Yorktown, selling American secrets to British gold, and two names still remained, the most dangerous of all, and Ruth would never share that revenge. By autumn of 1790, Ruth's partnership with Dr. Marcus Wainwright had turned volatile. He wanted more money, pushing her to expand beyond Virginia, Philadelphia, Charleston, even New York. But Ruth refused. Her mission wasn't about amassing wealth, it was about erasing names one by one until the entire network of traitors was buried. Because here's the truth, no court record ever revealed. Every man she killed belonged to a clandestine organization known among whispers as the Concordium. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was a network of elite merchants, judges, and politicians who had fed intelligence to the British Crown during the Revolutionary War, betraying soldiers on the field for land, gold, and power. Their reward? Seized loyalist estates, government contracts, silent control over Virginia's wealth. Ruth discovered the network after Yorktown, hidden in her husband's personal letters. 8 names, 8 men, 8 traitors. Fairfax, Randolph, Henley, Carrington, Bradford, Custis. 6 were gone, 2 remained. 1 was Dr. Harrison himself, the man who examined every body and signed off on every natural death certificate. The other was Governor Edmund Randolph, the man who'd orchestrated the betrayal. And Ruth was coming for him. Spring 1791, Richmond. A man arrived from Philadelphia under the guise of a customs inspector, but his true title was far more dangerous. Captain Jonathan Hale, an intelligence officer operating under direct orders from George Washington himself. Hale wasn't here for taxes. He'd been tracking whispers of a loyalist network that survived the war, quietly siphoning power through Virginia's courts and estates. He'd traced suspicious deaths, wealthy men, all tied to the same secret society, back to one address, Ruth Holloway's Clay Street mansion. But Hale wasn't prepared for what he found. Ruth wasn't hiding. She was thriving, hosting lavish salons attended by Richmond's most powerful men, charming governors, judges, and generals alike. She played her role so perfectly that when Hale finally met her, he doubted everything. Could a woman so composed, so serene, possibly be orchestrating a campaign of silent executions? Yet behind her calm eyes, Ruth recognized him too. She'd read Washington's intelligence dispatches years ago. She knew Hale's methods. And so began a dangerous game. The hunter and the hunted, circling each other under candlelit parlors and whispered conversations. Neither realized they were up against something far larger to han each other, because the Concordium had plans of its own. Summer 1791. Captain Jonathan Hale's investigation led him into the darkest corners of Virginia's elite society. Secret meetings in locked chambers, whispered codes exchanged through ledgers disguised as shipping manifests. The Concordium wasn't just a relic of the war, it was thriving. Hale discovered documents proving a staggering truth. The Concordium had brokered a silent pact with British envoys. In exchange for funneling land deeds, tobacco profits, and slave labor back to London, the Crown would restore their dominion in the colonies, not through open war, but through financial enslavement. The plan was already underway. Estates were being consolidated under Concordium control. Slave rebellions were being quietly provoked to justify harsher laws that funneled wealth upward. And at the center of it all sat Governor Edmund Randolph, using his office to mask a foreign occupation wrapped in patriotism. For Ruth, it confirmed everything. Her husband's death at Yorktown hadn't been an accident of war, it had been engineered. 2 names remained on her list, Dr. Harrison, the silent cleaner, and Governor Randolph, the mastermind. But before she could strike, she needed something more dangerous than poison. She needed secrets, and to get them, she'd have to outplay the Concordium itself. October 1791, midnight. A cold wind swept through the streets of Richmond as Ruth Holloway, veiled in black, slipped into the catacombs beneath the old Masonic Hall. This was where the Concordium met. The air was damp, lit only by rows of oil lamps burning low. The stone corridors twisted like veins beneath the city, carved decades earlier by enslaved masons whose existence had been erased from records. Ruth followed the faint hum of voices until she reached an iron door, cracked just enough for her to see inside. There, gathered around a mahogany table, sat 21 of men, governors, judges, merchants, and military officers. At the head, Governor Edmund Randolph himself. She listened in silence as they spoke of Project Ashfield, a plan to redraw colonial borders, transfer thousands of acres of farmland to British-controlled trusts, and indebt the new nation beyond repair. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Her name. They knew someone had been eliminating members, and they suspected her. Randolph gave a quiet order. "Make it look like an accident. Holloway must disappear." Ruth stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. For the first time, the hunter was now the hunted. 2 nights later, Ruth found herself face to face with Captain Jonathan Hale in the flickering light of her parlor. She hadn't summoned him. He came uninvited. "The Concordium wants you dead," he said, his voice low, eyes sharp. "They've dispatched men already." Ruth didn't flinch. Instead, she poured him a glass of bourbon and slid it across the table. "I know," she replied calmly. "But you don't understand what they really are." Hale leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. "They're not just traitors, Captain. They're believers." She told him what she'd overheard in the catacombs, about Project Ashfield, yes, but also about something darker. The Concordium wasn't merely trading land and wealth with the British, they were practicing rituals older than the colonies themselves. According to Ruth's husband's letters, the network traced its origins to pre-revolutionary secret lodges, men who believed their power came from binding oaths and blood sacrifices. Hale dismissed it at first, until she showed him a small, leather-bound book taken from Fairfax's study. Inside were names, dates, and symbols carved in crimson ink, alongside sketched diagrams of ritual circles beneath Richmond. For the first time, Heil und Ehr stood. This wasn't just about power, it was about possession, and if they didn't move soon, America itself might fall under it. November 1791, midnight. The old tunnels beneath Richmond ran deeper than anyone imagined. Armed only with lanterns and silence, Ruth and Captain Hale descended into the forgotten earth. Hale had studied the diagrams from Fairfax's journal. The Concordium's hidden temple was said to predate the colonies themselves, built on top of an Algonquin burial site older than recorded history. A place the tribe once called Nadawe Hante, the ground that whispers. They followed the sound of distant chanting. At the end of a narrow corridor, they came upon a massive stone chamber carved into the bedrock, lit by dozens of black candles. Inside, 12 Concordium members stood in a perfect circle, robes marked with a sigil Ruth had seen before, 3 interlocked rings surrounding an open eye. At the center lay a bound man on a stone slab, his chest marked with chalked symbols. Governor Randolph raised a ceremonial dagger and spoke words neither Ruth nor Hale recognized, not English, not Latin, but something far older. Then, as the blade came down, the candles flickered violently, and the walls seemed to breathe. Ruth felt it before she understood it. This wasn't symbolic. The Concordium believed they were summoning something, and for one terrifying heartbeat, Ruth believed it too. The moment the dagger struck, the air shivered like a living thing. Ruth grabbed Hale's arm. "We're too exposed," she hissed. They slipped into the shadows, heartbeats deafening. The Concordium's chanting echoed behind them, growing louder, almost alive. Every step felt like the ground itself was watching. Before fleeing completely, Ruth snatched a small obsidian talisman from the altar, a carved eye pulsating faintly in her hand. She didn't yet understand its full purpose, only that it was key to the ritual and to the Concordium's ultimate plan. Outside, the tunnels opened to the solemn, moonlit forest. Ruth inhaled the cold night air, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. Hale looked at her, wide-eyed. "They're planning more than land grabs, more than political control," Ruth whispered. "This talisman, it binds influence. It could extend their reach beyond Richmond, beyond Virginia, even beyond our nation." Hale swallowed hard. "Then we have to act now." Ruth nodded. Her eyes hardened. 8 husbands, 8 deaths, all sacrifices for justice, for revenge. And now, the final 2 targets awaited. But before they could strike, the talisman demanded something from her, a symbolic pledge to bind herself to the knowledge she'd uncovered. And here, listen closely. Write, "I see beyond the veil," twice in the comments, if you are ready to carry this truth forward, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Winter, 1792. Ruth Holloway had only 2 names left on her list: Dr. Harrison, the silent enabler, and Governor Edmund Randolph, the mastermind behind the Concordium. She moved with the precision of a general, each step calculated, each gesture disarming. Harrison was first, a man who had signed off on every natural death certificate, believing he remained untouchable. Ruth prepared her familiar tonic, one last formula, perfected to mimic a sudden illness that would leave no trace. Harrison drank, protested, begged, and then collapsed. Silence. Justice executed in plain sight. Governor Randolph was harder. Political power shielded him, his influence immense. Ruth knew a simple cup of tea wouldn't suffice. She studied the man, noting habits, vulnerabilities, who he trusted. She used the Concordium's ritual knowledge against him, arranging a meeting under the pretense of consulting on talisman law. There she exposed secrets only he and the network knew, leaving him paralyzed with fear, realizing the empire he'd built on betrayal and blood was crumbling. By the time dawn broke over Richmond, the Concordium was decapitated, 8 husbands avenged, the Shadow Society fractured, and Ruth Holloway, widow of tragedy, became a legend whispered in corridors of power, a name both feared and erased from polite conversation. Her justice was methodical, cold, absolute, and history never recorded her story. Years passed, and Ruth Holloway vanished from Richmond society, her name whispered only in fear and rumor, yet the echoes of her campaign lingered. The Concordium may have been dismantled, but its influence had permeated the foundations of power. Estates were seized, laws rewritten, fortunes shifted, all in the shadow of the secret knowledge Ruth had unearthed. Those who survived her wrath lived in quiet terror, aware that one misstep could summon her justice, even after decades. The talisman she stole remained hidden, its power undimmed, a silent witness to what had occurred beneath Richmond's streets. Scholars who stumbled across references to the Concordium sensed something larger, something forbidden, but the full truth remained obscured by time and fear. Ruth's 8 husbands, 8 deaths became more than revenge. They became a warning. To the powerful, to the corrupt, to those who thought betrayal could go unpunished. Someone was always watching. Someone was always remembering. And the most dangerous truth of all, Ruth Holloway's story is not merely history, it is a mirror. A mirror reflecting what men cannot ignore. Power built on treachery always demands its reckoning, and the price of hidden knowledge is a darkness that changes you forever. If you followed this story to its end, remember, some truths are alive and some shadows never fade.